Hill here. There is no better way to share a story than around a campfire. And if you are in the Mobile Bay area, there is no better place to get firewood than our friends at Mobile Bay Firewood. This is a family-owned business, and I personally love using their easy-to-light, kiln-dried firewood in my fire pit. So use promo code MBFTSO for $15 off of your next order at mobilebayfirewood.com. Longtime friends of the podcast, the Growley Leather Company is a family-owned leather goods company in southern Alabama. All of their leather goods are designed and handcrafted to come alongside you in your daily life, share in your adventures, and reflect your character. Brian and I both enjoy products from Growley Leather. So visit growleyleather.com and use promo code TSO2022 for a 15% discount at checkout. Find you a leather journal and fill it with stories from the storied outdoors. This is the Storied Outdoors, a podcast somewhere between Lewis and Tolkien and Lewis and Clark, finding clarity in the stories we tell and the adventures that shape us. Awesome. Welcome to the Storied Outdoors. My name is Brad Hill, and I'm joined by my good friend and co-host, Brian Gill. We talk all the time in conversations on this podcast about our love for sitting around a campfire or looking at the dancing flames of a fire in the fireplace. And we're always wondering, what is it about that that's so good? Why does it feel like it's good for you? These continual questions sort of led me to do some digging to see if anyone had done any research maybe in the benefits of fire. And so was there, I guess I was wondering, was there clinical proof to our experience that we've understood? So this took me to the Scotsman. I think that's what it was called. It was an article in the Scotsman, which I think was a UK based article. And it made this claim that a fire basically reduces your blood pressure. I was like, well, that sounds awesome. So I'm going to read that. And then that introduced me to Dr. Christopher Lynn. And Christopher is a professor of anthropology at the University of Alabama. So I'm reading a paper from the UK about a guy here in my home state of Alabama doing research on the very thing that we're super just interested to talk about and hear about. So our guest today, welcome to the Storied Outdoors, Chris. And thanks for joining us today, man.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me on. I love talking about this stuff too. It's quite a treat.
Well, being you're my neighbor here, so I'm not literal neighbor, but you're over in Tuscaloosa, and I'm in Birmingham, and so we're not too far away.
Did I just say a no, Brad?
Yeah, Brian is a graduate of the University of Auburn. So,
well, Brian, I have one child at Auburn and two at Alabama, so War Eagle.
Hey, yeah, man. Well, this is a house divided here with Brad and me, so we're in good company.
That's awesome. I love it.
But we love a good fire pit or a campfire or sitting around a hearth, whatever it is. So, and part of your research has focused on people gathering around these places. So, what drew you into this area?
Yeah, so this actually started when I was in grad school. I was reading this book. I was reading this article, but the guy wrote a book too. It's called Wondrous Healing. And the guy's name is James McLennan, and he is a sociologist. And he was basically making a case for the evolution of religion, saying that he thought that the kinds of rituals that people do to influence health, whether or not they're mechanistically connected to physiology or not, just like cause and effect, things that people would do to influence health, likely started around in the evening when people were chilling out around fires. And his evidence for or his thought process was Homo erectus were controlling fire probably around 700,000 or more years ago. At the time he wrote that, there was good evidence of that. And he figured the Homo erectus that was most calmed by the relaxing effects of fire would be gregarious, easier to get along with, and would get this benefit of like cooperation. And I was like, wait a minute, how do we know Homo erectus was relaxed by the fire? Are we just assuming fire is relaxing to everyone? And I was like, wait a minute, is fire relaxing to everyone? And of course, I'm sitting there reading an article. There's no one to talk to. But
right.
So I started thinking, well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But I couldn't find any data about the relaxing effects of fire. So as a grad student, I was like, I need to do this study. If I can just show that fires are relaxing, or even that not everyone is relaxed by fires, I've got an easy citation, easy publication that everyone who writes about fire like this will cite. Now, I was studying Pentecostalism and speaking in tongues and how that affected relaxation. So it was in one way a far cry from what I was doing, but I was already studying religion, and the model that I use, basically the idea of measuring some endocrine or physiological marker of something related to a cultural practice, is something that I knew how to do. That was something I was already doing. So I had this idea in my head of, we'll this quick and easy study to do. I was in New York at the time. I knew they had a fireplace in a local mall, and I was thinking we would go and just set up in the local mall, have people stare at the fireplace, get their blood pressure before and after, have them go stare at a wall, get their blood pressure before and after, mix up the conditions, so that it wasn't just always the one and then or always the other first, right? And then we could do a little bit of comparison. And I never really got that off the ground there. Mm-hmm. But it was the idea I had in my head when I got hired at Alabama and I wanted to start a lab. So the fireside relaxation study is the first study my lab, my human behavioral ecology research group, started when I started at the University of Alabama in 2009. And then I'll add this little piece of it. When I started doing the research, about a month or two after arriving, an anthropologist from Emory named Mel Connor, who had studied shamanism with the Kung Bushmen of the Kalahari years and years ago, had said, I used to do these trance rituals around fires, and I completely understand the hypothesis that you have. It's like the relaxation effect of those fires was really, really important. And I have to throw that story in because I just got this in the mail today.
Look at that.
And this was the title of Mel Connor's article about the relaxing effects of fire. And with his blessing, I took that title and used it to write the book. And this is
hot off the press.
My first book today, and it's hot off the press, and it has some of this fire research in it.
That's fantastic. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Man, that's awesome. So Brad's having a little bit of connectivity issue. There he is. He's back. But
you just missed my big reveal, Brad.
Yeah, Brad, he just published his book, and it's just off the press today.
Wow. Well, my internet went down.
So it's got about 2 or 3 chapters on fire in there. So
yeah, that's exciting. That will be in my Amazon cart soon. So when you started this study, you kind of make the transition for us from your grad studies to the University of Alabama. What did it teach you? You were kind of doing some some primitive work, and then you got some momentum behind this thing to get to where you are now. So what have we learned?
So the way we did this study, we did it in a completely artificial setting, right? So here's the problem with fire, as we all know. It's hard to control. We can control it, but it's hard to keep the temperature steady, the light exactly the same, the spectrum of light, the heat, how close someone sits. When we started thinking about, is fire relaxing, though, before we thought about any of that, we're like, well, is it looking at the fire? Is it sitting there zoning? Is it playing with the fire? Is it the crackling sound? So we thought, well, it's my guess. My hypothesis was that it's a multi-sensory immersive experience. In other words, it's just basically like it's absorbing us as many possible ways as it can.
Right.
And around the time I started doing this research, another anthropologist named Polly Wiesner published a piece. I forget the name of it, but it came out, and I think Proceedings of the National Academy of Science. It was a study of the San and hunter-gatherers in Papua New Guinea and how they use fire in the daytime versus the nighttime. And she pointed out that fire was being used in the daytime in utilitarian ways, and it was used in very different ways at nighttime. At nighttime, people, they sit down, they relax. So part of how fire relaxes you is how you allow yourself to be relaxed by the fire. So her thinking was, well, it's at the end of the day. Your circadian rhythms are gonna, they peak in the morning and then they drop off throughout the course of the day. They're done working. They're really open to sitting down around a fire and communing, right? So something about that evening and all of those things that were happening are probably influencing it. So she and I were sort of talking about this, and we're sort of thinking, how can we pull all this apart? So my first study, I was like, well, we're gonna just control for as many things as we can, right? We're gonna put it in a lab. We are just gonna have them watch a fire on a computer screen. So I got one of those Yule log DVDs, yep. And fortunately they don't all have dumb music on top of them. I found one fireplace and one campfire with natural sound. So that was our fireplace condition. In the first iteration of the study, I just had 2 5-minute conditions. They would sit and just watch the fire with no sound or anything else for 5 minutes and watch a blank computer screen for 5 minutes. And I'd take the temperature in the room, control for the time of day. And most of the people, they would walk out of there going, oh, that was fun. It was nice to have 10 minutes just to chill. And I'm like, well, that's not good, right? First they said it's weird without the sound. I'm like, well, we could probably add another condition without too much trouble. So we put noise canceling headphones in and added a fire with sound, fire condition, and then the upside down computer screen. Now they're still 15 minutes is still not long. And they're like, yeah, that was kind of nice. I found them all relaxing. It's nice to not have to do anything for 15 minutes. So it's like, okay, let's have 3 15-minute conditions then. Now you're in here for 45 minutes staring at a screen. Take that. That wasn't so relaxing most of the time. In fact, a lot of people came out of there going, that was really annoying. And I was like, good. That was the point of the study.
Mission accomplished.
We want to see if fire can relax you. So without stressing you, we mildly stressed you, right? And so what we found is, we got a statistically significant relaxation effect. In other words, we took the blood pressure before and after each condition. So we measured the change from pre to post in systolic and diastolic. And we saw a really small effect that was significant. We sent that off for publication, and we got one of our reviewers, who is an evolutionary psychologist named Matt Rosano, who disclosed who he was. I had asked him to be a reviewer anonymously, but he disclosed himself, and so I knew who he was, and he's written on this topic as well. So I knew of his credibility, and his ideas were sound. And he had said, a blank computer screen is not really like a fire. So as a control condition, it's not quite getting at what I think you're getting at. What if you take a picture of a fire or take a screenshot of the fire you're using? And better yet, turn that upside down. So you still have all the same features, just they're not quite the same.
Right.
So that's what we did. And we ran the study a 4th time, got the same results, but that control, was, I think, a better control. I liked it, and I felt comfortable with it. And so that study came out in Evolutionary Psychology in 2014, showing that there is a statistically significant relaxation effect, even when the fire that you're experiencing is a fake fire. It's only the fire with the sound. It's in the middle of the day. It's in a room on UA's campus, and there's a creepy researcher sitting behind you tapping away at a computer, right? Like under those circumstances,
It was still calming.
Still relaxing. Yeah. To me, that is the most important part, right?
Yeah.
The fact that we could find a relaxation effect through a cloud of noise.
In an artificial environment.
In an artificial environment, yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
So that's
then how much greater is the real thing?
That's the next piece of this. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's still hard to study that because of all of the issues that are difficult to control. But there's an intermediate step that I'll leave out for just a second. But the upshot of that is I have been doing some other research for the past several years, which has had my attention. And this has been, pun intended, on the back burner for a bit until in the middle of the pandemic, when I got a cold email from a publicist or an advertising company that handles the accounts for Napoleon fireplaces. Now, I hadn't heard of them. They're huge in Canada and Europe. I guess they're the number one fireplace and grill manufacturer in the world outside the US.
Wow.
And they're interested in taking home fireplaces to a different place. They're interested in marketing, helping create healthy homes. So not just fireplaces as sort of things that rich people play with and send their money up the chimney of, one, because they're better at building them now. They are fuel efficient. And two, they started to see exactly what you guys said when we started this conversation. We all have had this experience. They were like, we've always known this. It never occurred to us to market the relaxation effects because we didn't really think about how important being able to relax in your home is for stress and your day-to-day well-being, probably until this pandemic started.
Right.
I think they'd reached out to me a little bit before that, but the pandemic really reinforced it for everyone because everyone has been stuck at home. And if you've got a nice home with a nice fireplace, it's completely different than if you're not in a nice home with not a nice fireplace, as we can all imagine. So,
right.
So I now have a Napoleon fireplace hardwired into my office lab. It's the most overpowered fireplace with the amount of space, so we can replicate the study. And that's starting up right now. We just started recruiting folks this summer for that.
That's awesome. I can't wait to see the commercials for those. 9 out of 10 anthropologists say this is good for you. You know?
Yeah.
The actual research that proves this is good for you. So you should buy one of these.
That's fantastic.
I do find it interesting, when you say that. I've seen a huge, and I own one, and Brian does have one too. I think part of it is like, the algorithm for, whether it be Facebook or whatever's listening to us, markets things to me. But smokeless fire pits, outdoor fire pits there's a ton of those now, and those have gotten incredibly popular. And then one of the ones that I have is set up where I can not only I can cook on it as well as just sit around and enjoy the smokeless outdoor fire pit. And man, I love it, man. I love staring at it and sitting around it and the community that we experience around it. But I've seen a lot more of those, like you said, similarly, maybe coming out of a season where we actually needed that.
So I just did in beginning of March, I did the barbecue patio and it's a fireplace barbecue and patio expo in Atlanta. I did a talk for them. For Napoleon had me out there to do a talk. And I strategically put in my lecture a picture of myself at my outdoor fire pit because I've just got an old rusty metal thing that I've nailed holes in so it drains. So I wanted them to see what I'm working with.
Hey, you should try our new. And
right after the talk, I had a guy come up to me and goes, my daughter goes to UA, Roll Tide.
Fix you up.
I'm going to fix you up with a smokeless fire pit for your backyard. I am still waiting on it, but I was so happy and excited. I'm like, yes, all of that PhD totally paid off.
Let's go.
Money well spent.
So with, research and control and data aside, in your personal, your opinion, What about the fire causes that response that you discovered? What do you think that is?
I think it's what my colleague Polly Wiesner pointed out. I think it's a combination of how humans interact with each other, the time of day they do it, and that immersive experience that I mentioned, right? So when we choose, and I watch fire. I'll start a fire, even right now, 90 degrees out here. It's Alabama. We don't need a fire. I'll still put one in the backyard and sit there and watch it. I'll sit there watching football next to the fire.
Yep.
We're out throughout Alabama. You find people doing that, right? So there's, it's not the heat. It's not anything that anybody needs. So it's something that we like. One, we're doing that time of day, and the dropping off of our circadian rhythms is really, really important, right? So most of us are out of touch with those, I think. If folks are like me and they sleep as late as they can because in summer and then stay up late, you're liable to get a little out of whack with your circadian rhythms. But naturally, when the sun comes up, you wake up, and when the sun goes down, you get sleepy. That's the circadian rhythms. And it makes it easy to sit around a fire and relax then, right? Because you're just chilled out. The fire illuminates the only part that you can see. It's dark everywhere else. So you're having a sensory funneling toward that one area. This is where the sound is coming from. This is where the light is coming from. One of the pieces that I think is most important is called orienting response. And this is sort of what I've honed in on my research. It comes from Pavlov. He suggested that orienting response is the micro stress response you get when there's something novel in your environment and you're sort of startled and you look at it and you have a small, so your heart sort of jumps slightly, and you attend to it and you're, oh, it's no big deal. And you relax again, right? One of the things when you're outside and it's dark, the firelight plays all sorts of havoc with our receptors, right? It's very trance inducing, and it causes lots of visual distortions, and it's constantly triggering our orienting response, right? Whether it's the crackle of something or throwing sound or just the way the light flickers, we're kind of constantly, I think, having our orienting response toggled on and off. And what I think is happening is that it's a mini stress response. So when your stress response, for your stress response to turn off, right? Your stress response is the production of neurotransmitters that have jobs like cortisol, which is called a stress hormone. Now, the reason that's important is because it gets to a certain level, which mobilizes you. But if it keeps going, you're going to have a heart attack and die, right? You don't want your heart pounding that hard. So your stress response gets up and then it turns off. And I always sort of describe it as like a toilet, even though it's not quite like a toilet, but it's that sort of like it fills up and then it's got to have a stop point. So as soon as you stress out, your body is turning your stress response back off again. And the way it does that is by releasing endorphin, right? Which is endogenous morphine, which feels awesome, of course, like morphine. So if you're toggling that switch off and on, you're basically hitting the morphine pump, right?
It's amazing.
It's an analogy, and it's not as strong as morphine, obviously, but I think that's what we're getting at. And the reason that I think that, and this was the intermediate step I mentioned, I think that a lot of our interest in multimedia and in screens, television, one of the reasons television is so compelling is for the same reasons that fires are so compelling. We are a visually oriented species. So anything, especially visual, that catches our attention causes us to look, right? So flickering fire and TV have similar responses. And they've done the studies in media studies showing that the flicker rate causes that orienting response. So I think what's happening, that same sort of like chilled out effect that you get from watching TV to a certain extent is similar to what you get from a fire. Or we should put it the opposite from an evolutionary perspective.
Right.
The same effect that fire has been producing on us for probably at least 750,000 years, which is when we probably started controlling fire definitively, probably longer, right? We've been getting that effect. And when television came along, it gave us the same effect. And of course, then we gravitate toward it with the same sort of like, we get the same benefits out of it. So it's some biological imperatives. And if I can just throw one more thing in, because I think there's still a lingering question of why we need to do this. Like, why do we need to relax? I mean, it feels good.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
But my dog doesn't want to sit by the fire. He's a social species, a member of a social species, right? Like, we're unique in gathering around this semi-dangerous thing, right?
Yeah.
And I last year burnt my shed down. So stupidly gathering around, just from my fire pit, by the way.
Not the new one. Right.
Yeah, no, not the new one. So and what this book is about is consciousness. Consciousness is costly. Knowing that nobody agrees on anything is stressful. So we need to relax. We need to lower our stress, because otherwise it's not worth this brain. It's too stressful to know all that shit out there. So having these forms of relaxation has always been, I argue, critical to our species to be able to survive, to be able to use our brains in other ways, which is to know what some people are doing, to be able to think in the abstract, but not to be able to think about everything in the abstract, right? So fires help us put our blinders on and keep them on, help us self-soothe. And we can all relate to that part.
Yeah. I mean, Brian and I joke all the time calling it Caveman TV. Now we have justification for that term.
Oh, there's some great memes on there's a great piece in Smithsonian that was like advice to Homo erectus parents about fire, limiting your kids' fire time. It's awesome. I'll send it to you. I'll have to pull it. I used it in an article. So the intermediate piece that we did was comparing fire to TV, and we wanted to see if people got the same relaxation effects from TV that they get from fire. And that's hard because you got to choose your show. So I tried to choose some boring anthropology videos for them to watch. And we basically got the same effect. I just haven't published it yet. So TV and fire seem to have similar relaxation effects, even when it's boring.
Yeah. That's cool. You're talking about the endorphins being released to the different lights and all that. You look at what University of Alabama did with the stadium lights, and look at what Auburn has done with the stadium lights. I mean, it gets it makes people feel good. It gets people pumped up, and now you've got the science behind it. And
fish tanks, lava lamps. I think they all similarly are in the same sort of neck of the woods in that regard. So yeah,
fascinating. Utterly fascinating.
One thing you mentioned was how individuals react or interact around a fire, and this podcast is being recorded in May, and it will be launched in the fall. But just a couple of days ago, I spent 3 days on the Appalachian Trail with some friends, and so we were backpacking through there, and at night we would have a fire, and it seemed to kind of just be conducive for conversation and just contemplation and reflection. And what you said about the fire just really illuminates the faces, and everything else is blackened. I mean, we're sitting up there on the top of this bald at this campsite, 8 miles from civilization. We had just seen 2 bears. The only thing we could see were those people in front of us. But what do you think about, is there a relationship between the relaxation aspect and the contemplation and reflection aspect that brings out conversation around a fire?
That's a good question. So I think, I have so many thoughts on that, because one of the study models that we had when I had a master's student interested in pursuing this at one point was to send him up to the Appalachian Trail at one of those spots and just every night as people came and camped there to do the study on them and to collect those data. And then I had another option. John Gukin, who is the research coordinator for the National Outdoor Leadership School, saw this as a really good way to get folks who were training in the outdoor wilderness training and developing their leadership skills to learn how to self-soothe and find that. So to answer your question, that was a little shucking and jiving as I thought about it. But, I think part of it is again, that time of day, right? Mm-hmm. Like when you get up in the morning, all those hormones, the neurotransmitters, that circadian rhythm is mobilized to get you moving and to think about the tasks that you have during the day, right? So I don't know about you guys, but when I wake up, there's a few minutes that come into life. And then once I come to life, the number of things that I have to do that day start jumping through my head, right? It's not voluntary. It is a direct consequence of those neurotransmitters, those hormones starting their job, right?
Right.
I don't think integratively during the day most of the time, right? And so I think what you're describing with those ideas coming is that integrative thinking. And this is really what some of those theorists that I was talking about earlier were getting at. They were trying to understand, like, how do we get from, and this is a little bit left field, but it's similar. How do we get from being Neanderthal, who have a brain that is the same size and bigger in some senses, who are also probably using fire, also painting their bodies and have culture? Like, how do we get from that to humans who have just like basically exponentially taken those few cultural trappings and turned them into an iPhone, right? Like just the exponential integration of stuff, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things that some scholars have talked about is how the brain and our social lives might mirror each other in space. This guy, Stephen Mithen, is a cognitive archaeologist who wrote about how maybe the brains resemble the living floors of some of the species. And by that, we mean like where they organized their activities, right? So you could have a fire and cook things there, and you could flint nap over there, and you could strip the hides over there, right? You could do it all during the day, and then at night you just go to sleep. Or that fire seems to be extending the day. You could just keep going and doing all those activities, just move them closer to the fire, keep doing your activities while you talk to each other, and then you might actually learn stuff about how other people are doing things. And this is what the idea is that Mithen was proposing. He felt Homo sapiens seemed to be able to take new ideas from one intelligence. This is actually comes out of what's his name? Gardner's multiple intelligences idea from the 60s or whatever. Like you could have like flint napping people over there show painting people over here how to do something new. I mean, we borrow things and use them in novel ways all the time now. This is what we call creativity.
Right.
But if you don't have the capacity to think outside the box, then that doesn't happen. And part of it just means bringing things together. Now, I mentioned Neanderthal because he was trying to say Neanderthals couldn't do this the way humans did. And his argument was that when you look at Homo sapiens living floors, you see everything oriented around the hearth. Mm-hmm. But when you see Neanderthals living floors, they seem to be disjointed, like they weren't even integrating in physical space. He was saying maybe the cognitive ability is similar, and it may have to do with the way the brains are wired. We don't know.
Right.
We don't know, one, what Neanderthal brains look like, and two, I think he was wrong about Neanderthal living floors, because there's data coming out now on Neanderthal fire use. But the point is, and this is not directly answering your question, but it's sort of a roundabout way of saying, like, those contexts where they found to be social and do lots of activities around a fire together at that time of day when you're sort of like kind of loose and willing to listen to other and don't have like, I'm just much more willing to listen. I'll go to a rock show at night. I don't want to go to one in the morning.
That's so very true.
I want to listen and be talked at night, not in the morning. So I think that all those circumstances play together to sort of give that, whether it was 100,000, 200,000 years ago or now, the fire in the evening is a completely different animal. Or at night in your house, like when you're relaxed.
That's so good. That's so interesting. Like having it around in a central place. That's so cool. I love it.
Which is also how we do our TVs too, right? So again, we
sure.
Sort of wrap our lives around these things.
Yeah.
Yep.
What I love me, Caveman. I feel so justified in Caveman TV now. It's not just clever. Like, this is real. This is a real thing. There's why does sitting around the fire invite story? Now we're going from creating,
a little bit of a shift now.
Yeah. Hides. We're making, arrowheads, we're not just talking about technology and how do we get better at living, but now story. Like, why does it, because that's really what we care about a lot on this podcast is story. Why does it seem like, campfire stories that's such a stereotypical cliche, because that's where stories happen.
Yeah, it is. Well, again, this is why I think, TV became so successful, right? Like, this is what we have done since our species evolved. 300,000 years for Homo sapiens, but there's great evidence that Homo erectus were also sitting around. So 700, 800,000 years of sitting around fires. When language evolves, people are talking to each other. They don't have TV until recently. They don't have radio until recently. And they don't have cars until recently. So the only way you're exchanging social information is by talking. And the time when everybody's sort of sitting around together is at the fire. Now, it's a great time. This is how we get kids to do stuff. I think all stories are basically manipulating kids to get them to do stuff, right? Like I tell my kids stories and they always have messages because I want them to do stuff, or I want I'll tell you a story to inspire you to do this task that I want you to do because I need you to know how to do it. Right. So, I took my kid to get his driver's license today, and I told him like 700,000 stories about me and other people I knew getting their driver's licenses to make him feel better, less anxious, all those things. And I think that is, you don't need a reason to tell a story. We tell stories just as a matter of course to like manipulate the people around us. We have to, otherwise nothing gets done. So I think that, and some of us are really good at it and like it. I have a fondness for words, you may have noticed. So I am, I love the opportunity to tell a story, and there's nothing that gets me going more than my kids asking me, like, even if they even like have a questioning tone in a sentence, they say, I'm ready to tell them a story. Right. So that's the dad in me, but that's a biological imperative. We don't need a cultural reason to figure out why humans would want to tell stories. It's train the kids, manipulate the kids, keep the kids in line.
It sounds like there may be some opportunity for cross-departmental research with you in communication. That would be a really cool study.
I feel like you already have a ploy for wherever you have to do your lectures has to have one of your Napoleon fireplaces in it.
Right.
Yeah.
Just have the fireplace behind you as you lecture.
and they're so plus I don't know if you've had the opportunity to see or play with them, but when I went to this convention, the amount of like the degree of manipulation that they have with these fireplaces is incredible. But yeah, I could not have done better than I think I had a Napoleon fireplace right below me as I was up on this stage, and a big banner that was like the psychology of fire. And I was just like, wow. It was almost like being in a TED talk, except they couldn't get the monitors in front of me to work. So I still had to keep looking down on my piece of paper. But yeah, it's been an incredible ride. I'm really grateful. I always say I have a knack for doing studies to prove to people what they already knew to be true, and they love it. This study went viral. It is. I've done so many interviews from just that one article over the years, and obviously I continue to do this research, but every year around Christmas I get calls about this because it's topical, and I think that folks have a scientific intuition, right? We all have a folk physics, so for folks, sometimes science seems highfalutin, but when our intuitive understandings can be scientifically established, it's really satisfying for folks to realize that they do understand how the world is working. They are sensing it correctly as it is.
Wow, that's a good way to put it. Brad and I, we had always thought about these things, but to find someone who is like, yes, you put science behind it. It is a real thing.
It's a real thing. The way you experience the world is valid. There is a there.
That's funny.
Just because you think it's cool and popular doesn't demean it in terms of science. Right. That's one of the other things I think is really important is people think, I'll just say the other thing that I study a lot is tattooing, which is very pop culturally. But I'm like, if it's that popular, we damn well should be paying attention.
Yeah.
If it's that central to our everyday life, we need to understand it really well.
That's interesting.
Do you spend a lot of time around the fire, like around the campfire or anything like that?
Not as much as you would probably think. I do like to build them in my backyard and sit around that one a lot. I spend more time by myself around it than you would imagine either. I'm probably a problematic fire watcher, like a problematic drinker. I watch fires alone.
Is there a favorite story you like to tell around the fire? It's okay to say no. I mean, especially if you're sitting around a fire by yourself.
Yeah, no, not around the fire. No, my stories are really about the fire research and the burning half of my house down and stuff like that.
That sounds like a story in itself.
This is yeah.
He took Dr. Christopher Lynn. He took the fire watching a little too serious.
I did. I was working on my my compost heap too. I'm a big gardener, so I was like creating ash to get the acid pH balance right in my compost. And it was last year, just everything was too dry, and my shed was too dry, and there was a spark there. I thought I put it out. But...
Gosh, man. So. Sidebar, this is a total geek out note. So you're telling me when I clean out my fire pit, should I put some of my ashes in my compost?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
That's put them all in there. Like that's important. That's important for the acid pH balance. Yeah.
Especially garden tip for the day. That's happening.
The peppers. Love that.
Is it considered a carbon or nitrogen?
I think it's a nitrogen.
Is it nitrogen? That's good.
I'm not super awesome on that.
Okay.
Dude, that's great to know. Totally doing that.
I've got my compost. I mean, I'm looking at it from my window right here. So.
Yeah, I was burning down all the scrub and cleaning up my yard and putting it in there. And I had just gone and collected my neighbor's lawn clippings, and I squirted it down with water, but I didn't squirt enough. Threw his clippings on top of it, and his clippings are super dry. Went to Home Depot to get something, and my neighbor called me and is like, "You better get home. Your house is burned down." I'm like, I just left. That's impossible. They're
no.
We're breaking your door down to get the dog, and we're called the fire department. I'm like, don't break my door down. As soon as I got home, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm so happy they broke my door down. Holy shit. Got all my dogs out, but the smoke was like barreling out because it had shot right through my attic, and the smoke damage was worse than anything.
I'm glad your dogs are okay.
Yeah, got the dogs out. The fire people were yelling at me because I have a husky and 3 chihuahuas, and the husky bit someone and went and hid. And one of the chihuahuas nobody knew we had is about this big and was hiding up in a box spring. And I had to keep calling his name so he'd get his thing to jingle so I could find him.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
Yeah. My wife's not mad at me anymore.
Oh man.
Well, that's good. Glad you guys are past that.
Yeah.
One of the things we like to do at the end of our episode is ask, what's your next adventure? And you alluded to it earlier in the episode, I think. And you were talking about this new research that you're doing. And you got some, I don't know if it's grant money or something, some research money to look at fireplaces or something like that. So tell us what's your next adventure. And it could be even in the research realm.
So Napoleon Fireplaces reached out to me during COVID, and we came to an agreement. They wanted to replicate the original study and see if folks would get the same benefit from an electric fireplace, right? Because as the world pays more attention to climate change, they're concerned about building fireplaces that are harmful to the environment. So they started looking into electric fireplaces, and those are really popular, and they're interested in whether the health benefits that you get from watching a fire on a computer screen would accrue to fires for the kinds that they build. And some of them look like fireplace fires, and some of them have sort of different looks. So they gave us a nice chunk of change. They gave us a fireplace and $50,000, which is funding my a PhD student for a period of time.
Sweet. That's awesome.
Yep. So we're hoping that's to start. So we are doing data collection right now in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. If anyone's interested, anyone who participates in the study gets a $20 gift card and gets entered into a drawing to get I think it's a $500 Napoleon grill.
Wow.
So anyone listen, hopefully the study will be over by the time folks listen, but you never know. We're going to hopefully be collaborating with Napoleon for some time. Cool. We have lots of ideas. They have lots of ideas, and they have lots of fireplaces. So, we want to see what it's like inside, outside, different times of day, different types of fire. And I also just want to put out there that, I can't possibly corner the market on all this. It's weird how something that is so central to the human experience and so important to the evolution of our species is so understudied in some ways.
Yeah.
There's just certain things that we just they're so right in front of us, we miss them. And this is one of them. It's been studied in certain ways, like for eating and things, but in terms of how it affects our cognition, our emotions, the things that we think about constantly all day long, it's not been studied well enough at all. One of my colleagues also involved in this study is at the University of Illinois, and they are looking at the impacts of this relaxation in geriatric populations. So they're trying to use it to help people in assisted living facilities relax so that they can be more explorative, right? So this is the next piece of this, right? Like when you're relaxed, you're more engaged and joyful and more interested in learning new things. When you're stressed,
Absolutely.
You're like, I don't want to learn anything new. I just want to get through the shit I got to get through. And they find that people in nursing homes, they either tend toward exploration or exploitation. Exploration is that enrich your life. Exploitation is doing what you know how to do to get shit done. But when you're in assisted living, at that point in your life, so that they explore life a little bit more. So that is also part of this study. And I'm excited about both of them, because I think that once we get this information out there, once we get these studies out there, it's not just about those of us who've already enjoyed the fire pits that we have in our homes, but to realize that there's even more potential there that we can exploit for our family members and our loved ones.
I guess the big question is, can I get a doctor's prescription for?
Well, if you can get it from medical marijuana, then probably we're not too far off.
Not too far off. The doctor's written a prescription for a new fireplace for my house.
It is healthier
for my health.
It's healthier than smoking weed. So yeah.
There we go.
Hey, Chris. So the one last thing, this is kind of off script, but I realize that the work that you do doesn't always lead to something. Sometimes it's just answering the question. Sometimes it's just exploring something. But is there something that you would like to see your research do or contribute to in a practical way, bringing it down to a consumer level? Even is there something in there that you would like to? What would you like to do other than answer the question, or is answering the question enough for you?
Answering the question is enough for me in one sense, because what is so profoundly exciting is what we're doing here, right? We're talking about science. I'm telling you the nuts and bolts of the scientific method and demystifying it so that anyone can understand how we got the results that we got and why we think it is. It's not magic. It does look like magic sometimes. So my objective is less that I want fire to do something for people than to think. I want people to think about their everyday world and their everyday lives and some of the things that we take for granted that we don't really understand all that well, and how easy it is to actually turn around and investigate that. Like turning kids into everyday scientists, or someone who never thought science was for them, that they can approach something in their own life in a scientific way and come out with a little bit deeper understanding of it. I think that to me is more satisfying than any particular thing about any of my particular research subjects. My other subject that I spend a lot of time on, as I said, is tattooing, not because I think tattooing is so important, but because it's a really good avenue into the human experience. And I think fire is similar, right?
And I love that answer. I love the fact that getting people thinking of this way and thinking of it as, there's got to be more to it, that, and having a few answers. We're not ever going to have all the answers, but it's all, it's fascinating to think that, there's something in there that draws us to this, and it's just a neat way to look at it.
And even asking the question, if we can get people to ask the question, because sometimes when we talk about it, people are like, oh, I never. Trim their toenails, like stuff that you'd never ever, and I'm not going to conduct a study on that, but like the question never even occurred to me until a few years ago. Now, why would it? But I work with that kind of, but what I'm trying to say is, like, ask silly questions about banal things, because it gets you to start thinking, like, nobody notices this, like that there's a problem here. Like if something as simple as that, it's like, okay, it's not a problem in that we need to solve how they did this, but there's a physics issue. Like, did toenails used to keep growing? Do they ever stop? Is there a molecular mechanism that no one has been paying attention to? So just silly questions like that get us to start thinking about, like, our physiology and our anatomy and our genetics in ways that we wouldn't otherwise.
I mean, that's for us. I mean, that's what drove us to look around and go, why is this way? Because, I mean, every other conversation with guests or stories that we tell, comes from an experience around, sitting around the fire with a group of friends. There are a few things. I mean, C.S. Lewis makes this comment in one of his letters: is there any pleasure greater than a group of Christian friends around the fire? And And he's right. I mean, there is such a great, there's a relaxation and an enjoyment, and it's a joy, a literal joy to sit around a fire with a group of guys or a group of friends, to just not have an agenda and talk and stare at the flames and just be, and a fire causes us to do that sometimes. Unlike the television, when for a television, like, it's doing that for us and we're just watching it and we're zoning out. But when we're around the fire with a group of people, then we're actually a little more engaged, but we still have something to stare at.
It gives us the space, right? It doesn't cost. It gives us the space.
Yep.
And I'll push back just a bit on the TV thing, because I think with the TV takes the space away when the show's on. It becomes the story. Yeah. Turn it down on mute, and you might. So one of the reasons I think like this is because when I was 23, I used to get free drinks at this bar in New York City. So I felt obliged to go there after work every day because I got free drinks. It's a silly thing, but nonetheless. So I go there and they have a loop on the TV that's just going. And there's nothing. It was dark in there. So there's nothing to do but just stare at that loop. And if there's anyone to talk to, I would talk to him, but I would talk to him and my eyes would still be up there because it's what I could focus on.
That's interesting.
And I always come back to that thinking, like, your eyes just get pulled to those things.
Yeah.
And yes, I would much rather talk to someone. Yeah. And I definitely did, but I still looked at the screen as my focal point.
I've seen this trend, and and it's gonna take somebody like you to study it, but like, I don't know what it is. I do not like to have a TV in the restaurant that I go to or the bar that I go to, because I think it takes away from the whole ambiance. I think it takes away from the atmosphere. I don't know. It seems like there may be more conversation going if there wasn't a TV. I don't know when that happened. I would love to see a study on if TVs add to or take away from the experience within a social setting.
Yeah, no, that I imagine in media studies that has been done.
Yeah.
I just put my toe into that field when I started looking at television addiction and as an analog, and I started thinking about that because I took my kids to the doctor and they'd have TVs up there with cartoons on and no sound in the doctor's offices, and the kids would be staring at those TVs and we'd be talking to them and they would just be like, and I'm like, the sound's not even on, guys. Can you pay attention to us a little bit? And I'm like, wow, that's just like the fire. These kids are completely enthralled.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And an article I read by Robert Cuby and Csikszentmihalyi. His name is Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. You may have heard of him. I just like saying that name. They wrote an article. Television addiction is no mere metaphor, and they in the article, the guy is saying, I'm a television researcher, but if I'm talking to someone and there's a TV on in the background, even though I know I should keep my eyes, I can't, to the person I'm talking to, even as a television researcher, knowing everything I know, I can't help but to look at it. Right?
Yeah.
It's just so compelling.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And that's where I got that orienting response, right? That flickering, like that feeling compelled by something, right? So there's a lot of issues with television, but there are pieces of it that resemble that.
Yeah, that's so good.
Wow.
And it's been I was looking forward to this and it didn't disappoint.
It did not disappoint.
Interesting topic and conversation, man. Thank you for taking time to join us, man.
It's my pleasure. I'm happy to oblige. As you can tell, I can talk all day, and
I love it.
I love talking about this subject. So
it's been so good. How can you've said a few things about how people can join you guys, but obviously this will air much after your research is done. But you talk about your book. How can people get a hold of your book?
So my book is called Transcendental Medication, like Transcendental Meditation, but medication, right? Mm-hmm. So a little play on words there. The Evolution of Mind, Culture, and Healing. It's on Routledge Press, but you can get it on Amazon.
Awesome.
You can find me and my website, just Google Christopher Lynn, University of Alabama, and you'll find me. And I'm on all the socials many times over. So
that's awesome. Well, I'll make sure all of that's, we'll have all that in our show notes for people
cool.
to find your book and support your work and to learn more about your research, man. That's awesome.
Appreciate it. And in a year or so, we should have some fireplace money results. So feel free to give me a call. I'll be happy to share those results.
Go back around. That'd be great. That'd be great. And we love this conversation. I mean, we often will call the podcast our digital campfire conversation, where we can just circle up and just share stories and share life and learn and have conversations. And we've gotten to meet so many interesting people. And man, that certainly includes you, Chris. And man, just love hearing all about this and hearing all about this science. And ultimately, our goal is for these stories to encourage people. There's so much that's divisive, and there's so many conversations that aren't encouraging, that aren't just good to listen to. But this has been such a good listen and a great topic, and something that I'm sure people have thought about, much like we have thought about. And we hope these things encourage people to write stories, to share their own stories. Maybe they go build a fire this evening and sit around the fire and go, oh yeah, that's why I feel this way whenever I sit around the fire, and continue to, and I'll enjoy it all the more. Now I have, I'll love my Caveman TV joke, because it's not a joke. It's true. And,
science, man.
It's science. And, but I'll also, my time around the fire will be even more rich than it already is, because now I understand it better. So thank you for that.
My pleasure.
Man, as we have this conversation, we joked, we don't make any money off of this either, but we are trying to grow it and share this conversation with people. And if people want to do that, they can leave us a review on iTunes and a rating on Spotify. If you use Spotify, you can find us on all the different platforms. And but if you want more information, you can join us on our website at www.thestoriedoutdoors.com for more information, show notes, and we'll have your book, Chris, linked on there, and then ways people can follow your research. Somebody may be inspired to do their own research, and maybe some researcher or doctoral student go, an idea will spark from this, and they will go do their own research and write some papers, and maybe you'll gain some colleagues out of this conversation. That'd be
beautiful.
Phenomenal. But man, we hope this inspires people to write their own stories and do what we call share their own adventures in what we love to call the storied outdoors.
All right. This is the new after episode, just for a marker, for the marker's sake.
Yeah.
So Brad, man, we just got a great conversation with Dr. Christopher Lynn, and man, good job.
Cool.
Good job finding him, man.
Oh man, we have asked that question and asked that question.
Every time we're around a fire, we ask that question.
Or in conversation. We're talking about, some experience that we've had, and man, we found ourselves sitting around the fire, and we love it. I love it so much. And some of my favorite times are those times. And so it drove me to ask the question.
There was a couple of things he talked about, and I didn't really want to get into a super spiritual conversation in that episode, because I didn't feel like that maybe was the right time.
Yeah.
But one of the things he said was talking about rest and why do we need relaxation?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
God showed us that in his creation. On the seventh day he rested, in it's Sabbath, this idea of Sabbath. And I think you and I have talked about this a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't that fascinating to see that, this
science is pointing to the necessity of rest.
Yeah, the necessity of rest. Yeah, how about that?
Yeah. And that our bodies need it, and our rhythms kind of show us that. I think is basically kind of what he was saying.
Yeah. Yeah, and one of the other things I thought was really neat that he said was just this the way that we communicate with each other through story.
Yeah.
Throughout history, not just in the Bible, not just with Jesus and the way that he told parables, but throughout history, we've used story to communicate. And that's what you and I always talk about. is cherishing these stories and these experiences. And a neat way to do that is around that fire when we relax.
Yeah, and it really draws it out of us. I think he said it several times, the circadian rhythms was a fascinating point of going, oh yeah, I want something different when I first wake up than I do whenever I'm slowing down. He's like, I don't go to a rock concert in the first thing in the morning. I don't want to be talked at the first thing in the morning, but in the evening, we're at a different place. Our bodies are in a different place. And that was just fascinating. And the whole deal about like a little bit of us being startled and it triggering basically that, he used the analogy of morphine, but essentially that science of, that causing a sort of a constant response of that. And then that's why we're sort of relaxed. It causes this thing to release in our body. So cool, man. So cool how the Lord has designed our bodies, and the way that they respond to, to the fire like that.
Yeah. And
it made me think, Paige, my wife, found this, she found this poem. I think I shared this with you from Tolkien.
Yeah.
I wanted to share that on.
Yeah. Read that for us.
It's entitled, I sit beside the fire and think. I sit beside the fire and think of all that I have seen, of meadow flowers and butterflies in summer that have been, of yellow leaves and gossamer and autumns that were, with morning mist and silver sun and wind upon my hair. I sit beside the fire and think of how the world will be when winter comes without a spring that I shall ever see, for still there are so many things that I have never seen. In every wood and every spring, there's a different green. I sit beside the fire and think of people long ago and people that will see a world that I shall never know. But all the while I sit and think of times that were before. I listen for returning feet and voices at the door.
Man, we need to find that in a printed form somewhere. I need to have that close by.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. It just speaks to so much of what we experience,
Yeah.
Around the fire. We do ask questions that we don't encounter throughout the day.
Yeah. And one thing that Chris said that I really thought was very insightful was that it creates a space. It creates the opportunity for these conversations, for these reflections, for these sit beside the fire, and for the opportunity to think. So, I think that maybe one of the powers of that fire is that it is an open door invitation to these things. And so building those into our life is important. There should be times that we aren't always thinking of accomplishing something other than just being and thinking and reflecting.
Yeah.
And reflection is something that you and I have talked a lot about. We're going to be doing some more talking about that in the future. But man, what a cool opportunity to have that conversation with Chris.
Yeah, man. I was just thankful that he took time to join us.
Yeah.
Yeah. It wasn't our normal guest too. That was something cool to kind of get us out of it's easy to fall into sort of a rut and stories and guests and things, but we've been so, we've talked about that so much, and I was like, man, I would love to hear someone really explain, and there's legit justification for that feeling and for those thoughts, and there's answers to that question, and that was really cool.
Yeah. Well, cool.
I don't know if we're going to bleep out, he wasn't the cleanest guest we've ever had.
We want to keep it kid friendly. It's pretty easy to do a little bleep every now and then, but hey, what he brought to the table surpassed a few swear words.
Yeah. It didn't really bother me.
Not at all.
But I thought, man, it was really, really, I'm just so thankful for that guest. That's cool.
Good job finding him. And I hope that maybe we could even do a Where Are They Now with him sometime.
Yeah. So, I'd love to come back around, circle back around and, hear what the new research discovers.
Yeah.
There's an ongoing potential conversation there.
Cool. Yeah. Well, I'm glad we took this little bit of time to kind of recap the discussion.
Yeah, man. Well, I definitely will have all that on the website, and I'll be sure to put that poem on the website.
Yeah.
I think that'll be cool.
Yep.
So additional content there on the website, and more ways to stay in contact, more than just podcast episodes, right? So we'll have blog posts and photo galleries and all kinds of different things. Social media is one way to keep up with us, but the best way by far to keep up with us is thestoriedoutdoors.com.
Yep.
Go there. You can email us from there. You can get on the contact page, and you can kind of keep up with all of our adventures outside of even just the podcast episodes. So it's a really great place. So take advantage of thestoriedoutdoors.com.
All right. Well, we'll see you guys next time.
Sounds good, man.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, please take some time to leave us a review. Or better yet, share it with a friend. We hope these stories encourage you to write your own stories and share your own adventures in the storied outdoors.
Brad Hill here. There is no better way to share a story than around a campfire. And if you are in the Mobile Bay area, there is no better place to get firewood than our friends at Mobile Bay Firewood. This is a family-owned business, and I personally love using their easy-to-light, kiln-dried firewood in my fire pit. So use promo code MBFTSO for $15 off of your next order at mobilebayfirewood.com. Longtime friends of the podcast, the Growley Leather Company is a family-owned leather goods company in southern Alabama. All of their leather goods are designed and handcrafted to come alongside you in your daily life, share in your adventures, and reflect your character. Brian and I both enjoy products from Growley Leather. So visit growleyleather.com and use promo code TSO2022 for a 15% discount at checkout. Find you a leather journal and fill it with stories from the storied outdoors.